So we're opening it up. I'm going to start with the first question, and then if you want to put your hands up, we'll run the mic to you as well. So the first question is, Blair, did I hear right? Are we going to maybe see an improvement to the multiplex bylaw to 4 stories and 6 units? Because that would help make these pencil in a lot more parts of town.
It would make a very big difference, certainly. I'm hopeful that that's what happens. So just by way of an update, and I'm glad you asked the question because I wasn't sure if it fell outside the scope of my presentation or not. But so the long and short of it is the housing accelerator funding that the City of Toronto has applied for requires a more ambitious approach to combating the housing crisis through the creation of more permissive and less restrictive policies and regulations. Among other things, a motion was brought forward, this would have been in December, I think, of last year, by Councillor Brad Bradford, directing staff to look at the possibility of revising the multiplex regulations to permit up to 6 units as of right instead of 4, and permitting up to 4 stories as of right instead of 3. Staff were directed to look into this, study this, and report back to council in the second quarter or mid-2024, which is now. And I have not heard anything back on that per se, specifically. I've actually reached out to Brad just to sort of see if he has an update, and I haven't heard back from him specifically on it. But that should be forthcoming. So that would be something that we would expect to see, I would hope, in the coming, council cycles. Perhaps things have a tendency to move a little more slowly at the city than sort of anticipated when they project their timelines. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it were the fall, after the council recess. But that is something that is forthcoming.
Okay, and Councillor Bradford will be here this afternoon, so we could all encourage him to get this done.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, audience questions.
Hi again, Tom Knezis from Solaris Architecture. I had a question about the development charges on the accessory suite or ancillary suite for 4+1s. My experience is that it sounded like you were saying that if you add an accessory suite, you're going to be then a 5-unit building and all the development charges will apply. We haven't quite gotten there on all of our projects. We've had to do them in sequence, but is the accessory suite, the garden suite or laneway house, being counted as a 5th unit in terms of development charges?
I assume that's directed at me.
Yeah.
So this may be a question better answered by some of my colleagues, but my understanding is it's the number of units total. And that may apply irrespective of their location. Is that correct? Like you can have 4 units, 3 could be in a triplex and a garden suite at the back, but it's that threshold of a 5th unit. And sorry if that wasn't clear.
That is correct.
That's my understanding.
We've kind of run into that issue on one project we did where we had 4 units in the main house and then a laneway house, but we started it before the 4-unit bylaw came into effect, so our laneway house was already under construction. So when we reapplied for that 4th unit in the house, then we were going to be hit with all 5 DCs, or DCs for all 5 units rather.
Which can be substantial.
It was over $240,000. So we had to kind of finesse that.
Plus, if my understanding is correct, that also triggers the requirement for cash in lieu parkland dedication at
Yes.
5 units.
Yeah.
So it's less the form and more just the number of units.
I can speak to this as someone that's gone through the process now. We're all here to help each other, so I figured jump in and give some input
Please.
on this. My name's David Grant Rubash. I'm with Phaedra Studio, founded that several years ago. Not working on these types of projects, but getting involved just by the base nature of caring about the city and seeing it thrive. And after many years of pursuing these projects, getting to a point where we're seeing this 4+1 model. And I can confirm that just going through this, I've had the same interpretation with staff. And how getting around it has worked is do 4 in your 4-plex maxed out, do your permit separately, but you will not be able to avoid the development charges for all of the units unless you first close the permit of your 4-plex. So, but in the meantime, you can, submit and start the deferral process if you're doing that for the laneway. So you always have to think about it as a 4+1 in your staging. But the city will work with you and comment on that along the way.
I think there's one more layer of complexity, unfortunately, to this like super weird phased workaround where you have to then presumably commence and complete construction of one building before commencing the construction of another building that will be serviced through the first building. Ignoring that pain in the, I think that in order for the DCs to be deferred from the fifth unit, that specific unit is only granted the deferral, and it's not no DCs, it's a deferral of DCs if it's guaranteed to be a rental suite for some period of time. And I think the mechanism the city's using to enforce this is a registration on title of the amount of the DCs, which has some financing implications. So, and what's unclear is that if in year 2, 3, 4, 8, or 21 you decided that you wanted to sell the unit, are you then on the hook for what the DCs cost in 2024? Or are you then a 5-unit building that, like, there's some real ambiguity around this, but there is a single narrow theoretical path for 4+1 with no DCs. It's just a little kind of, yeah.
You are right about that.
If you sever or condominiumize to sell, you're not just on hook for the DCs at that time or the laneway. You're actually on the hook as if it's a freestanding
Yeah.
single-family home. So it goes from, say, what is 40 to 70,000 in fees to 120 plus. But one thing we've done to get around, if you can manage it, setting up an ancillary building that's not a laneway or garden suite as part of your initial permit, but you have to be smart about it because it needs to meet the requirements of a home in that initial construction, and then you go in and try to convert it after. Now, we haven't done that yet, but we're in the process of doing it so we can service them in advance of.
It's just so,
It's
like,
it's complicated.
Yeah,
If it
and
was
I'll-
easy, everyone would do it.
That's right. What I'll add to this is not so much like uncertainty, I think,
Yeah.
by our panel, but this is really the ambiguity in the policy and how it's written and how it's interpreted by different staff. So it really is that silly. So as part of this potential improvement to the multiplex bylaw to 4 floors and 6 units, there again have been rumors, there has been talk of kind of cleaning this DC exemption up. So hopefully this kind of like wacky state of affairs doesn't last too long. Okay, next question. Yeah.
Just on the topic of delays and risk in project, I'm just curious, when you're conceiving a project, how much are you thinking about avoiding minor variances to just not have to deal with the committee of adjustments process? And are you even scaling projects back, sometimes thinking just, I don't want to have to deal with those timelines and that risk?
I think that should be for everyone. Yeah.
I love that fight. I've never, ever built anything without a minor variance process, and our odds used to be like 50%-ish, and they've gotten tremendously better since the committee shifted to an online process, so like 2020-21. It does seem like there's a significant, this is obviously anecdotal, but like when I go to committee, I hang out there all day and plan to do that in retirement. Like, it's a great place to hear all the petty urban development banter happen, right? And so anecdotally, I think that the whole attitude of the committee, with exceptions, I got a painful story too, to encourage housing and do things like when you as a neighbor are saying, why does this person want to have a 3rd floor on their house? The committee member is saying, sorry, sir, could we get your house up on you have a 3rd floor, why can't? So that's a real change. And even compared to 4 or 5 years ago, you know, it seemed if we were there with opposition, they do that hall, why don't you and your opposition go into the hall and we'll talk to you last. And that's really shifted. And if you guys want to amend your application to be more palatable to the neighbors, that's great, back of the line, we'll see you in 3 months. And that's changed to committee members saying, you know, here's an idea, why don't we alter your variances? You want these 5 things, we're cool with 4 of them, but what if we take your depth from 20 meters to 19 meters? Things with massive architectural implications, but like from the floor in this effort to expedite. So sure, we're gonna like bemoan inefficiencies of bureaucracy throughout this day, but like this is a real improvement, which could be better, and I'd love to see abolished, but like could be recognized as having improved over the past 5 years. I have 4 stories too, though.
I have to be careful what I say, because if I tell you to, ensure everything is permitted as of right, I'm going to find myself out of a job. But I think, having said that, I think if you're looking for the greatest chance of success at the Committee of Adjustment, and as you said, it's quite likely that almost all projects are going to require some kind of variance, or the majority will. Start from the perspective of, if you can, what can you achieve as of right on this site? And you're going to need tweaks for height or setbacks or things like that. If your effort is to maximize your chances of success at the Committee of Adjustment, start from that perspective to the degree that you're able to, and then only apply for the variances that you really need. Instead of taking the more aggressive approach of, I'm going to go for 2 additional units or this or that. I mean, obviously there's a place for that, and I'm fully in support of efforts to achieve those typologies. But if you're looking to de-risk, if the effort is to de-risk, while it may be unlikely to proceed on the basis of everything happening as of right, I think you can start from that mindset and then have a rational conversation with Committee of Adjustment members about what variances are required and the reasons why, and setting yourself up for success that way.
And to add to that point, I mean, I think it's great to go to committee and get variances if required, but I think it also depends on how you've purchased the property and what your time crunch is on that property. Like if you're able to close with a substantial VTB and you have lots of time, sure, go to committee, ask for the world. But if not, then try to identify a property where, as of right, you can add a significant amount of square footage, where you can add units and it's not a logistical nightmare. So it all depends on the property and what you've purchased and what your end goal is, because as we know, time is money. So if you're sitting there with a variable mortgage and committee adds 6 months of time to your project, it may not be worth it. So it's kind of a cost-benefit analysis at the end of the day.
I'll add one quick thing to that as well. I'm working on a 4 residential unit, 1 commercial unit project with my brother, our partners Chris and Nando, who are in the room. We went to committee. We asked for a number of variances, including slight increase to the height, slight increase to the depth, and a few other things. We had a 3-to-1 vote in our favor, so we got the minor variances approved, just to have our neighbor, who had organized a bunch of opposition, appeal us, which cost like $300 to appeal at the time. And for us would have meant a major cost in terms of planning fees, legal fees to fight it at TLAB, as well as we were about to trigger, this would have pushed us past a development charge rate increase. So ultimately, through a process that could only be described as extortion, we paid him $15,000 to drop the appeal. A month later, the province passed legislation no longer allowing for third-party appeals of COA decisions, which is to say, we got bit by this, but that is one way in which the process has been de-risked recently by policy. So anyway, we're going to find a way to get our money back from this guy. But anyway, next questions.
Hi, folks. Hope everyone's doing well today. I'm just curious about this extortion matter. Is it common practice to pay off neighbors in that way? Has anyone else had experience with that? And are neighbors usually receptive to that? Like, is $15,000 really enough to make this project acceptable in the eyes of a neighbor? And if so, maybe that person shouldn't be fighting you to begin with.
I don't know if you guys have any anecdotes. The only thing I'll say is, again, now that third-party appeals are not permitted, there's less room for that. This was like a business model. This is something you could do, is just make money and appeal developers. And we were building a multiplex. You could have people appeal larger developers building larger projects and get a lot more money than that. But I think the perverse incentive somehow made its way to the Ministry of Housing so that they no longer allow for third-party appeals. More recently, we've also seen with Provincial Bill 185, no third-party appeals to zoning bylaw amendments either, which is maybe a little bit out of scope. So to the extent that that's the case, there is less of this. I don't know if you guys have any stories on dealing with our neighbors.
I'll just I love minor variances in that whole process. We have a fairly comprehensive community outreach process that we do in every project, and it is important to engage with the community. Again, barring the idea that the committee of adjustment should actually be abolished and community consultation maybe doesn't need to be a part of minor variances, ignoring that. Given that that community consultation is considered to be like a policy, like written in stone component of getting minor variances, it's important to reach out to the community, to understand their concerns, to be able to articulate their concerns to the committee and to planning staff, and to be able to forge compromises. We find frequently that neighbors want to be heard, want to feel that they've made an impact on the building. I see a bunch of architects here. You're the worst neighbors to have with the development. Like, no architect I've ever built beside is happy till they've peed on it a little bit first. But the important thing is, like, those don't always have to be things that affect your bottom line in any way or in any measurable way. I have a lovely but very involved neighbor on a triplex +1 project right now who said, you're putting some shadow on my windows. I would like you to put a skylight in my roof and like fix up my porch. Okay, that's not $15,000, and it's not unreasonable. Like that was the result of hours of conversations. Like, there was real engagement there, but I find that those kinds of things are so important in processing that, because if you're talking about infill, then you're filling in between things that already exist, and it's not just about bulldozing your way through and like creating some front doors because that's what the world needs come hell or high water. There's absolutely a little bit of engagement and elegance to the process.
And that goes a long way when articulating that to committee members, and it goes a long way to de-risking projects when you're building essentially consensus or buy-in around an idea, right? That people are much less likely to appeal, hopefully. Hopefully.
Yeah, no, definitely very important to keep your neighbors involved. I've been lucky enough not to have ever been extorted by a neighbor, but I had one experience where we had a committee application and a neighbor made up an address and filed a letter of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Opposition?
Yeah. Thank you, letter of opposition for an address that didn't exist, which we found pretty hilarious. But yeah, neighbors, like I mentioned, can be a handful. So you want to try to keep them involved, but also not tell them everything at the same time.
I had day 4 of a T-Lab hearing yesterday for what was supposed to be a 1-day hearing, and one of the neighbors with party status called in sick that morning, so now there will be a 5th day of that hearing in a month. Like, it cuts all ways, but...
It really does.
If it was easy, everyone would be doing it.
Yep.
Okay, next questions. I don't know what the mic is.
Hi, question for, oh wow, that's very loud. Question for Evan. You'd mentioned in your talking about converting project into condominiums, that you were handing over a lot of control, especially I noticed exterior features, to the unit owners. How are you balancing that with sort of wanting to preserve your designs? Because handing over that control, obviously they can act both out of accordance with the condominium corporation, but out of accordance with each other.
Sure. I guess the short answer is I just don't care. I feel like I made it and I built it and now it's yours. And if you want to do something else with it, then it's literally yours. So it's not what I would necessarily want or like or love from like an ego or legacy perspective. But my work is done at that point. I think there's significant barriers in a realistic way to something significant happening in any kind of short or medium term, though, right? Like, I'm reflecting back on everything we've ever built, and I've got pretty good long-standing relationships with most of the current occupants and homeowners, and they reach out with little home improvement projects, and I can't think of anything more invasive than like adding a deck that anybody's done in a decade plus. So it's for sure rhetorically possible, it's legally possible. We've set up condo bylaws that don't prohibit that kind of work, and even if we had prohibited it, they're the condo corporation. They can rewrite the bylaws to suit, right? But at that point, I mean, it's the city's building it. Like, it's no longer mine, so you gotta let it go.
Hi, my name is Ben Gom, Project Studio Architects. We also have a laneway house initiative called Blockhouse that we put together. It's actually using shipping containers to drastically cut down on construction costs and, most importantly, construction time. I actually did also have a T-Lab nightmare, and what they should have done right from the beginning is, if they would have made the application, the same cost as the committee of adjustment application, $3,000 instead of $300, it would have cut down by probably close to 100% of the people who were willing to spend that money to go to, to be petty, and because we had the same thing, and it actually destroyed my client's life, but that's a whole other story. My question was actually, with the laneway houses, we've got our 4+1. I personally don't understand, and I hope there's an initiative from the city to change the amount of units that are going to be allowed in the laneway homes themselves, right? Because we're doing 2-story laneway homes. There's really no reason in my mind why it can't be sort of 3+2 or whatever it ends up being. So is there movement for the city to be able to?
I can start if you want.
I know of one.
Okay, go for it.
Great question.
There was an approval in November at the Committee of Adjustment for a lot on Lisgar Street, which was an L-shaped lot, so it had 15 feet of frontage on the street and then 45 feet of frontage on the laneway, and they got approval for 2 laneway houses there. Like and staff supported. So I think at this point, there needs to be some sort of extenuating circumstances that, the site is irregular in some specific way to accommodate that. And I know that there's been a bit of a DC nightmare in that project as well. So I think there was a sense that that the second laneway suite should be subjected to the full force and effect of everything. But the understanding is there that bylaws don't apply to every site and exemptions are needed on a site-specific basis.
Yeah. Is there any movement from the city to be able to amend that? Because again, in my mind, I'm trying to think of every reason why, it wouldn't be allowed, and there's no logical reason, right? So.
There's a gentleman from Creatio and from the City of Toronto sitting in the row behind you. We should talk to them about the Beaches East York Missing Middle pilot project, because among other things, it incorporates 2 accessory building structures, one technically classified as I think a laneway suite, guys, right? And the other is a garden suite. Both of them are contemplated to be more than 2 stories. We're looking at, I think, currently sort of envisioning something like 3 stories with multiple units in them, each of them. Mm-hmm. So that's obviously a pilot project. I know that the intent is to sort of create replicable solutions that could be applied to other sites throughout the City of Toronto, maybe at some point in the future serving as the impetus for future changes to regulations to allow these things in certain areas of the city. I know the city's about to start looking at transition zones and opportunities that exist within transition zones at the edges of neighborhoods, between neighborhoods and major streets and avenues. And this is one of those sites. So maybe there's some opportunity there.
Yeah, I can speak to sort of the pushback from city. I'm actually in the middle of an application right now to get 2 units in a laneway house. One of the driving factors of the opposition from planning, the property I'm working on, it was a substantial renovation. The house is actually set significantly further back than every other house on the street. So when you're encroaching in that angular plane, they don't seem to want to allow 2 units. What I was told is that when you're not within that angular plane and you're over, I believe it's 25 feet from the main dwelling, to allow you not to have the angular plane roof, they're more tolerant to allowing 2 units in the laneway suite. Or if you just have a bigger lot, like you mentioned, that L-shaped lot. It's actually right around the corner from the one I've applied on. So again, I think that's something that needs to be looked at, because when you have a massive laneway suite, to try to rent that out is going to be very difficult. It makes more sense to have 2 units in there, and it just makes housing more affordable at the end of the day. So definitely something to work on with the city.
I'll just add that it's logical, won't save you in many cases when dealing with the city, but obviously you're right. Let's take one more question, and I know there are many hands up. So Vova, can we do one, or Matt? And then for everyone else who we didn't get a chance to speak or to get your question, Ryan, Evan, and Blair will be in the audience, so please do grab them.
Right. I have a question relating to parking, because yes, we kind of focus on kind of urban core multiplexes, but there's a large suburban area in the city of Toronto with larger lots. Is there any initiative from the city to allow more street parking in kind of the suburban areas like the Etobicoke, Scarborough, North York?
So this would be, I guess, a question for transportation services. You're talking about specifically retrofitting the existing municipal right-of-way to incorporate more on-street parking where it doesn't currently exist. Is that right?
Yeah, it's hard to have, it's hard to not have a car being the suburb of North York or Scarborough or Etobicoke.
Yeah.
Is there anything to address that parking need for people in multiplexes?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, not specifically in terms of anything that I'm aware of, and if anybody knows of something, please speak up. What I do know is the parking regulations have changed in the last couple of years, and we're now dealing with maximum parking requirements instead of minimums. So I guess that would become, obviously in a certain context, a factor that would need to be considered in the design of a multiplex, whether or not there was need felt on site for parking. In terms of what's happening within the public right-of-way, I don't immediately know. I don't know if anybody does know here today, but that would be something that transportation services would be ultimately responsible for, I guess.
Yeah, I haven't come across any specific regulations for parking. It seems to kind of be non-existent when you're dealing with downtown sites, especially with the laneway suites. You're literally removing parking for living space, so hasn't come up yet.
Okay, so with that said, again, if you had a question, sorry, we couldn't get to them all, but please do grab Ryan, Evan, or Blair to ask them. We have a nice long 30-minute break, so plenty of time for that, and for everybody to mingle, grab some food, some refreshments, and we'll be back up here 11 o'clock.